The chains on my wrists were cold, but my hands were steady. That was the part that seemed to bother them the most. 7 judges sat above me in a curved row of dark stone seats, their bodies wrapped in robes that shimmered faintly under the chamber lights. Each of them belonged to a different species, and each of them looked down at me the same way, like I was something they had already decided to throw away. I stood in the center of the room, alone, on a raised circle of white floor that seemed to glow from beneath. My name is Ethan Cole. 3 days ago, I was a squad leader on a listening post near the edge of contested space. Today, I was the accused. Tomorrow, according to the words I had just heard, I would not exist at all. The lead judge, a tall being named Threll, with silver skin and eyes like polished glass, rose from his seat. His voice filled the chamber without him raising it. Ethan Cole of Earth, you stand before the Coalition Tribunal, charged with violating direct combat protocol during the engagement at Corvo Ridge. 14 witnesses confirm you disobeyed a standing order from Allied Command. Your actions endangered 3 Allied ships and caused the deaths of 2 Velkari officers. I kept my eyes forward. I did not look away from him. You do not deny this, Threll continued. In your own statement, you confirmed that you broke formation without authorization. I broke formation to save 42 people trapped in a collapsing transport, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I would do it again. A murmur ran through the chamber, not from the judges, but from the gallery behind me. Dozens of delegates from a dozen worlds sat in silence, watching the first human ever to stand trial before this council. I could feel their eyes on the back of my neck, like a physical weight. Threll did not blink. His kind rarely did. That is precisely the problem, Ethan Cole. Your species does not yet understand the meaning of order. You act on instinct, on emotion, on impulse. Today, this tribunal will demonstrate to the wider coalition what happens when a young species refuses to learn. He lifted a thin data rod from the table in front of him and set it into a slot on his podium. A holographic seal appeared in the air above the judges, spinning slowly, its edges lined with symbols from a dozen alien languages. By unanimous vote of this tribunal, Ethan Cole is found guilty of gross insubordination, resulting in loss of Allied life. The sentence is termination, to be carried out within this facility, witnessed by representatives of all member worlds, as a demonstration of coalition law applied without exception. Sentence to be executed at the 14th hour. The words landed on me like stones dropped into still water. Somewhere behind me, I heard a sharp intake of breath from one of the human observers in the gallery, a junior officer who had been sent to record the proceedings. I did not turn to look at her. I kept my eyes on Threll. I thought about my mother, who used to tell me that fear was just excitement without the memory attached. I thought about the 42 people I had pulled out of that transport before it folded in on itself like a crushed can. I thought about my squad, half of them still out there somewhere, not knowing what was happening to me in this room. And strangely, I felt calm. "Do you have any final statement, human?" Threll asked, and there was something almost curious in his tone, as if he expected me to break down, to beg, to prove every assumption his people had made about mine. I lifted my chin. "Just one thing," I said. "You keep calling this justice. But you never once asked what would have happened to those 42 people if I had followed your order and stayed in formation." Threll's glass eyes narrowed slightly. "The order existed for a reason." "So did I said. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence in that chamber was heavier than any sound could have been. Then Threll straightened, and with a small motion of his hand, 2 guards in dark armor stepped forward from either side of the room. Their weapons were not drawn, but their intent was clear enough without them. "Take him to the chamber," Threll said. "Let this be recorded as a lesson to his people." The guards closed in on either side of me. Their hands, too many-fingered and too cold even through my sleeves, gripped my arms. I did not resist. There was no point in resisting. Not here, not against soldiers built for war on a dozen different gravities. As they turned me toward the side doors, I caught a glimpse of the gallery one last time. Rows of alien faces, most unreadable to me, some openly curious, a few almost sympathetic. And near the back, standing very still, the young officer who had been sent to record my trial. Her name was Naomi Blake. I saw her hand tighten around the small recording device she carried, her knuckles pale. She would carry this footage back to command, back to my people, back to whoever was left of my unit. I wanted to tell her it was all right, that I had made my choice with clear eyes and I did not regret it. But the guards were already moving me forward, and the doors ahead of us were opening onto a corridor lit in a cold blue light that seemed to lead somewhere very far from anything I understood as home. The corridor stretched longer than it had any right to. Polished black walls reflected our footsteps back at us, distorted and doubled, so that it felt like a small crowd was marching me toward my end, instead of just two guards and a condemned man. Somewhere far above, hidden vents pushed out air that smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet I could not place. I thought about Corvo Ridge again, because it was easier than thinking about what waited at the end of this hallway. We had been assigned to hold a listening post near the debris field, watching for enemy movement while 3 Velkari cruisers ran defensive patterns further out. It was supposed to be quiet duty. Then the transport carrying refugees from the outer colony hit a minefield nobody had mapped, and its hull started folding in on itself section by section, venting atmosphere into space faster than the emergency systems could compensate. Command had ordered us to hold formation. The official reasoning was that any deviation could expose the fleet's true position to hostile scanners. I understood the logic. I still broke formation, took my 2 fastest ships, and pulled as many people as I could off that dying transport before it came apart completely. 2 Velkari officers died in the crossfire that followed, caught by an enemy patrol that noticed our movement exactly the way Command had feared. I had turned that outcome over in my mind 1,000 times since. I still did not know what I would have chosen differently, if given the same seconds again. The guards stopped at a wide door made of the same dark material as the walls. One of them pressed a hand against a panel, and the door split apart with a low hiss, revealing the room beyond. It was smaller than I expected. Round, with a domed ceiling that curved down into walls covered in slowly shifting patterns of light, symbols I did not recognize drifting past like slow-moving clouds. In the center of the floor stood a single raised platform, waist-high, empty except for a faint outline etched into its surface, shaped like a standing figure. This was where it would happen. The guards walked me to the platform and released my arms only long enough to guide me up onto it. My boots settled into the etched outline as if the floor had been built to measure. I supposed, in a way, it had. "You will stand here until the appointed hour," one of the guards said, his translator device giving his voice a flat, mechanical edge. "Any attempt to leave the platform will be met with immediate restraint." I did not answer him. I looked instead at the walls, at the drifting light patterns, and understood without being told that this room had been built for exactly one purpose. Not punishment. Performance. A message, carefully staged, meant to be remembered by everyone who witnessed it and everyone who would later watch the recording. The guards withdrew to positions near the door, weapons held loosely but ready. I was alone in the center of that glowing floor, with nothing to do but wait and think. I thought about my father, who had been a soldier before me, and who used to say that courage was not about the absence of fear, but about what you did while carrying it. I thought about the 42 people from that transport, scattered now across a dozen colony worlds, most of them never knowing my name. I thought about my squad, the people who had trusted me to bring them home, and I hoped that whatever happened to me here would not follow them like a shadow. Time moved strangely in that room. I could not tell if minutes had passed or hours. The light patterns on the walls shifted slowly from cool blue to a deeper violet, and I wondered if that shift marked the passage toward the appointed hour. Then, without warning, the door split open again. I expected another set of guards, or perhaps the judges themselves, come to observe the final moments of their demonstration. Instead, a single figure stepped through the doorway, and my breath caught in my chest. It was Colonel Grace Ashford. She wore her dress uniform, the deep navy fabric pressed into sharp, clean lines, every metal and service bar polished until it caught the shifting light from the walls. Her boots struck the floor with a measured, unhurried rhythm as she crossed the room toward the platform. Her face was calm, almost unreadable, but her eyes found mine immediately and held them. The two guards near the door straightened, clearly unsure how to respond to an unscheduled visitor. One of them stepped forward, speaking rapidly into a small device on his wrist, no doubt requesting clarification from someone higher up the chain. Colonel Ashford ignored them entirely. She walked until she stood directly in front of the platform, close enough that I could see the tightness at the corners of her mouth, the only sign that betrayed the effort it was taking her to remain composed. For a long moment, she said nothing at all. She simply looked at me, the way a commander looks at a soldier they have known for years, weighing everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. Then she stepped back, squared her shoulders, and raised her right hand in a slow, deliberate salute. It was not the quick, casual salute soldiers gave each other in passing. It was the full, formal gesture, the one reserved for the fallen, for ceremonies of the highest honor, for moments that a military remembers for generations. Her hand rose with perfect precision, held at her brow, her spine straight, her eyes never leaving mine. Behind her, the guards exchanged confused glances, unsure whether this was some kind of surrender or an insult they were meant to intervene against. Neither seemed quite right to them, and so, for the moment, neither of them moved. I stood frozen on that platform, unable to speak, as my commanding officer offered me the single highest honor in our tradition, in a room built by strangers, to be the last thing I ever saw. And then, still holding the salute with one hand, she reached into her jacket with the other and withdrew a small, dark device, no larger than a coin. "Colonel," one of the guards finally managed, his translator crackling faintly with the effort of keeping up with her, "you are not authorized to be present in this chamber before the appointed hour." Colonel Ashford lowered her hand at last, but her posture did not soften. "I am aware," she said, her voice calm and clear, carrying easily across the room. "I am here under Coalition Founding Statute 7, Section 12. I am invoking the right of final right on behalf of a condemned soldier of my command." The guards looked at each other again, clearly unfamiliar with the reference. One of them spoke quickly into his wrist device once more, requesting confirmation from someone unseen. I found my voice at last, though it came out rough. "Colonel, what are you doing?" She looked at me, and for just a moment the calm mask slipped, and I saw something underneath it. Not fear, fury, tightly controlled, and beneath that, something that looked almost like hope. "I am doing my job, Ethan," she said quietly. "The same as you did yours." She lifted the small device in her hand, and with a press of her thumb, the drifting light patterns on the walls around us flickered, paused, and began to change. The change started slowly, so slowly that at first I thought I was imagining it. The violet light patterns drifting across the domed ceiling seemed to hesitate, like water pausing before it decides which way to flow. Then, one section at a time, the alien symbols dissolved into darkness, replaced by something else entirely. Flags. Human flags, rendered in soft light, unfolding across the curved walls in slow, deliberate motion. Not just one nation's colors, but dozens, woven together into a pattern that circled the entire chamber. Beneath them, names began to appear, scrolling gently upward, each one glowing faintly gold before fading into the next. I recognized some of those names, soldiers from my unit, soldiers who had not made it home from other engagements, going back years before I ever set foot on Corvo Ridge. My chest tightened as I understood what I was looking at. This was not decoration, this was memory. The guards near the door had gone very still, their weapons lowered slightly as they stared up at the shifting walls, clearly uncertain what was happening or whether it constituted some kind of threat. "Colonel Ashford," the lead guard said, his translator struggling to keep pace with his own confusion, "explain this interference immediately." "It is not interference," she said, without looking away from me. "It is procedure." She reached into her jacket again and withdrew a slim data tablet, its surface glowing with lines of text in both English and a shifting alien script that I assumed was some kind of automatic translation. She held it up, angling it toward the guards, though her words were clearly meant for a wider audience than the two of them. Founding Statute 7, Section 12, drafted at the formation of this coalition and signed by every member species including my own, grants any condemned soldier the right to a final rite, performed according to the customs of their homeworld, provided that rite does not physically interfere with the execution of sentence. This chamber, and everything within it, falls under that statute the moment I invoke it. The guard hesitated, clearly unwilling to make a decision above his authority. "This must be confirmed by the tribunal." "Then confirm it," Colonel Ashford said evenly. "I imagine they will want to see this for themselves." As if her words had summoned him, the far door split open again, and Threll entered the chamber, flanked by two of the other judges I recognized from the trial. His silver skin seemed to catch the shifting gold light in a way that made him look almost startled, though his expression remained carefully composed. "Colonel Ashford," he said, his voice tight with restrained irritation, "you are disrupting a sanctioned execution." "I am exercising a right guaranteed under coalition law," she replied, holding up the tablet again. "Section 12 of the founding statutes. I believe your tribunal is familiar with it." Threll's glass eyes flicked toward the glowing text on her tablet, and for the first time since I had seen him, something like uncertainty crossed his face. He turned to one of the judges beside him, a shorter being wrapped in deep red robes, and exchanged a few clipped words in a language I did not understand. The judge in red produced a small device of his own and began scrolling through what I assumed was the coalition's legal archive. "This statute," Threll said slowly, "was written at the founding of this coalition, before your species had even joined. It has rarely been invoked." "That does not make it invalid," Colonel Ashford said. "Every member species agreed to it, including yours, when the Velkari joined 3 centuries ago. It has never been repealed." The judge in red looked up from his device, his expression unreadable beneath his robes, and spoke a single word to Threll in their own language. Whatever it meant, it made Threll's jaw tighten visibly. "The statute is valid," Threll admitted, each word sounding as though it cost him something to say. "But it grants only the right to perform a rite. It does not grant the right to alter the outcome of this tribunal's judgment." "I am aware," Colonel Ashford said. "I have no intention of altering your judgment, Judge Threll. I intend to honor my soldier before your sentence is carried out, exactly as the statute allows, nothing more." Something in the way she said it made me look at her more closely. There was a tightness around her eyes that had nothing to do with grief. It was the look she wore in the field, right before she executed a plan she had spent hours perfecting in silence, while everyone else assumed she was simply waiting. Threll studied her for a long moment, clearly searching for some flaw in her reasoning, some technicality he could use to remove her from the chamber. He did not find one. Slowly, reluctantly, he inclined his head. "Proceed," he said. "But know that this changes nothing. The sentence stands." "Understood," Colonel Ashford said. The judges withdrew to the edge of the chamber, close enough to observe, but far enough to signal they would not interfere further, at least not yet. The gallery beyond the far windows had begun to fill with more onlookers, alien faces pressed close to the glass, drawn by whatever signal had gone out announcing that something unusual was unfolding in the execution chamber. Colonel Ashford turned back to me, and for the first time since she had entered the room, she allowed herself the ghost of a smile. "Do you trust me, Ethan?" she asked quietly. "Always have," I said, though my voice shook slightly. "Good," she said, "because this is going to take a little longer than they expect." She lifted the small device in her hand once more, and the walls around us shifted again, this time revealing something new. A long list of names and dates, rendered in careful, precise text, hovering in the air above the platform where I stood. At the top of the list, in bold gold letters, was a name I did not recognize. Velkos Thane, Founding Delegate, 3rd Assembly. "Who is that?" I asked. "An answer," Colonel Ashford said, "that your judges forgot they had written down themselves." She began walking a slow circle around the platform, her eyes scanning the scrolling text as it continued to unfold across the domed ceiling, and I realized, with a growing sense of disbelief, that she was not simply honoring me, she was building a case. "When the coalition was founded," she said, loud enough now for everyone in the chamber to hear, including the judges watching from the edge of the room, the very first conflict between member species was resolved not through punishment, but through a doctrine written by Velkos Thane himself. A doctrine that has never been struck from coalition law, though it has clearly been forgotten by those meant to uphold it. Threll's expression shifted from irritation to something sharper, more alert. "What doctrine?" Colonel Ashford stopped walking and turned to face him directly, the glowing names of my fallen comrades still drifting slowly across the walls behind her, like a silent chorus of witnesses. "The doctrine of necessary deviation," she said, "written into coalition law 300 years ago and never once repealed." The chamber went very quiet. Even the guards near the door seemed to lean forward slightly, as if the air itself had grown heavier with the weight of what she had just said. I stood on that platform, chains still hanging from my wrists, and for the first time since the trial had begun, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was not the end I had prepared myself for. Threll's silver face had gone very still. "Explain," he said, and this time there was no irritation in his voice at all. Only something that sounded almost like dread. Colonel Ashford did not answer him immediately. Instead, she reached into her jacket one final time and withdrew a second, larger tablet, one that she set carefully onto a raised ledge near the platform so that its glowing surface faced the judges directly. Lines of dense text scrolled across it, alongside a small rotating seal that I recognized faintly from documents I had once been required to study during officer training and had never expected to see again. 300 years ago, she began, before the Velkari, before the coalition even carried its current name, two founding species stood on the edge of a war that could have ended both of them. A single commander, faced with an order that would have led to the deaths of hundreds under his care, broke that order to save them. He was tried, exactly as Ethan Cole has been tried, and in the aftermath of that trial, the surviving founders of this coalition wrote a doctrine to ensure that judgment would never again be passed without asking the one question your tribunal never asked my soldier. "And what question is that?" Threll asked, though something in his tone suggested he already suspected the answer and did not want to hear it confirmed. "Whether the order that was broken was itself lawful," Colonel Ashford said. A ripple of movement passed through the gallery beyond the windows. Somewhere behind me, I heard Threll's fellow judges murmuring quickly to one another in a language I could not follow, their voices tight and urgent. "The order to hold formation at Corvo Ridge," Colonel Ashford continued, "was issued by a Velkari fleet officer named Doran Vess. I have already confirmed, through records your own fleet was required to log, that Officer Vess issued that order without authorization from Mission Command, exceeding the scope of his rank during an active crisis. Under the doctrine of necessary deviation, any soldier who breaks an unlawful order to prevent loss of life cannot be held criminally responsible for the consequences of that deviation, provided the original order itself violated established command protocol." Threll's glass eyes turned sharply toward the judge in red robes beside him. A rapid, hushed exchange passed between them, too fast for me to follow, but I did not need to understand the words to read the tension in their posture. "This is a matter that requires verification," Threll said finally, turning back to Colonel Ashford. "You cannot simply present a claim of this magnitude and expect this tribunal to accept it without review." "I don't expect you to accept it," Colonel Ashford said. "I expect you to review it." Which is why I brought the full command log from the Valkyrie fleet vessel Arendt Spire, retrieved through official liaison channels 4 hours ago, showing Officer Vess's original transmission, time-stamped, unedited, and cross-referenced against the standing rules of engagement that were active at the time. She reached into her jacket one last time, produced a small data rod identical in shape to the one Threll had used to display my sentence, and held it out toward him. For a long moment, Threll did not move. He simply stared at the small object in her outstretched hand, as though it were something far more dangerous than its size suggested. Around us, the glowing names of my fallen comrades continued to drift silently across the domed ceiling, and somewhere in the gallery beyond the windows, I could hear the low hum of dozens of alien voices speaking at once, drawn by whatever signal had spread word of what was unfolding inside this chamber. Finally, Threll reached out and took the data rod from her hand. He turned, walked to his podium at the edge of the room, and inserted it into a waiting slot. The air above the podium shimmered, and a new display unfolded, filled with dense records, timestamps, and a recording that began to play, tinny and distant, but unmistakably clear. I recognized the voice immediately. Officer Doran Vess, the Valkyrie fleet commander who had issued the order to hold formation, speaking urgently to his own crew in the moments before the transport began to break apart. His words, translated into flowing text beneath the recording, confirmed exactly what Colonel Ashford had claimed. He had issued the order on his own authority, without confirmation from Mission Command, believing incorrectly that enemy scanners had already detected our position. He had been wrong, and 2 of his own officers had died because of that mistake, in a crossfire that would never have happened if the transport's true position had not already been exposed by his own delayed order. The chamber fell utterly silent as the recording finished playing. Threll stood at his podium for a long moment, his silver face unreadable, his glass eyes fixed on the scrolling text still hovering above him. When he finally turned back to face the room, his voice had lost the sharp edge it carried during my trial. "This record is authentic," he said quietly, more to his fellow judges than to anyone else. "It has been verified against the fleet's own transmission logs." The judge in red robes stepped forward, speaking for the first time since he had entered the chamber, his translator rendering his words in a slow, careful cadence. "If this record stands," he said, "then the order Ethan Cole disobeyed was itself unlawful. Under the doctrine of necessary deviation, his actions cannot be classified as insubordination. They must be reclassified as a lawful response to an unlawful command." Threll closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, something in his posture had changed, as though a great weight had shifted from one shoulder to the other without disappearing entirely. "This tribunal requires time to formally review these findings," he said. "Take the time you need," Colonel Ashford said, "but I would remind this tribunal that the appointed hour of execution is rapidly approaching, and I do not intend to allow a lawful soldier to be put to death while a formal review remains open." For the first time since I had known her, I heard something dangerous creep into her voice. Not a threat exactly, but something close enough to it that even Threll seemed to notice. He looked at her for a long moment, then at me, still standing on that glowing platform with chains hanging from my wrists, and finally at the scrolling names of the fallen still drifting silently across the walls of the very chamber his people had built to end my life. "The sentence," he said slowly, "is suspended, pending formal review." Somewhere behind me, I heard Naomi Blake let out a breath she had clearly been holding since the moment Colonel Ashford first walked through that door. I looked at my commander, standing tall in the shifting gold light of 100 names she had brought back to honor me, and for the first time in 3 days, I allowed myself to believe that I might walk out of this room after all. The formal review took 6 hours, though it felt like 6 years standing in that chamber, watching alien officials move back and forth between the tribunal and hastily assembled records rooms somewhere deeper in the facility. At some point, the guards removed my chains, a small gesture that meant more to me than I could have explained to anyone who had not stood where I was standing. Colonel Ashford stayed the entire time. She did not sit, did not rest, did not once take her eyes off the proceedings, as though her presence alone were another kind of shield she had chosen to hold over me. When Threll finally returned to the chamber, flanked by all 6 of his fellow judges, the air itself seemed to hold its breath, along with every person watching from the gallery beyond the windows. After thorough review of the evidence presented by Colonel Grace Ashford, Threll said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent chamber, this tribunal formally acknowledges that the order given at Corvo Ridge exceeded the lawful authority of the issuing officer. Under founding statute law, specifically the doctrine of necessary deviation, the actions taken by Ethan Cole in response to that unlawful order do not constitute insubordination. He paused, and for a moment I thought I saw something almost like respect in his glass eyes. The sentence of termination is vacated, he said. Ethan Cole is cleared of all charges. The words landed on me differently than the sentence had. Where the sentence had felt like stones dropping into still water, this felt like the water itself had simply stopped existing, replaced by something lighter than air. I did not move for a moment, half convinced I had misheard him. Colonel Ashford turned to me, and this time her smile was not a ghost of one. It was full and unguarded, the kind of smile I had only seen from her a handful of times in years of serving under her command. "Welcome back, Lieutenant Cole," she said. I stepped down off the platform on legs that did not entirely feel like my own. The room around me was still bathed in the soft gold light of names drifting slowly across the walls, and I understood, looking at them, that Colonel Ashford had never intended for this room to remain a place of judgment. She had walked in with a single salute and had spent every hour since quietly turning it into something else entirely. "How long have you been working on this?" I asked her quietly as the judges began filing out to prepare whatever formal announcements would follow. "Since the moment I heard the verdict," she said. "I did not sleep. I am not certain I will sleep tonight either, honestly, given how many favors I called in to get access to that fleet log." "You could have just told them I was innocent," I said, "argued my case from the start." "I did," she said. "They did not listen to arguments. They listened to law. So I found the law that mattered, and I made certain they could not look away from it." I glanced up at the walls, at the names still drifting slowly overhead, at the flags of 100 nations woven together into a single pattern that no longer felt like decoration, but like a promise kept. "And the room?" I asked. "The salute?" Her expression softened, just slightly. "You were not going to die without knowing that your people remembered you," she said. "Whatever happened with the law, I intended for that much to be true no matter what." Behind us, near the doors, I noticed Threll had lingered, watching our exchange with an expression I could not quite place. When he saw me looking, he inclined his head slightly, an unfamiliar gesture from him, though I understood enough now to recognize it as something like respect. "Lieutenant Cole," he said, approaching slowly, "it is rare that this tribunal is shown to be wrong. Rarer still that it happens through nothing but patience and law, rather than force. With respect, sir," I said, "you built this room to be a lesson for my people. I think you got one instead." Something flickered across his silver face that might have been the alien equivalent of a smile, or might simply have been surprise. "Perhaps," he said, "perhaps that is a lesson worth learning." He turned and left the chamber without another word, his fellow judges following close behind him, leaving Colonel Ashford and me alone beneath the drifting names of soldiers who would never know how close their memory had come to saving one more life. Naomi Blake approached from the gallery entrance, her recording device still clutched in one hand, her eyes bright with something between relief and disbelief. "I have never seen anything like that," she said. "The whole gallery was watching. Every delegation. This is going to be broadcast across half the coalition by morning." Colonel Ashford glanced at her, then back at me, and something quietly satisfied settled into her expression. "Good," she said. "Let them see it. Let them understand that we do not abandon our own, and we do not need to raise our voices or our weapons to prove it. Sometimes all it takes is knowing exactly which door to walk through and exactly what to say once you are standing inside it. I looked around the chamber one final time, at the flags and the names and the soft gold light that had replaced the cold judgment this room had been built to deliver. I thought about how close I had come to never seeing any of it, and how strange it was that the thing which saved me was not strength, or anger, or defiance, but a single salute and a commander who refused to let a room decide what my story would become. As we walked toward the doors together, leaving the glowing chamber behind us, I turned back one last time. The names were still drifting slowly across the walls, and for a moment I thought I saw my own name among them, not as a mark of the dead, but simply as a soldier who had been remembered, and who, against every expectation, had been allowed to walk back out into the light. Colonel Ashford's hand found my shoulder as we stepped through the doors, steady and certain, the same way it always had been on every mission we had ever shared. "Let's go home, Lieutenant," she said. And for the first time in 3 days, I let myself believe that I would.